Hello and welcome to Invisible Hate. I am Saadia Khan.
And I'm Asad.
And our today's story takes us to Mexico City in October 2005. A young man stares into the eyes of a mysterious stranger. The two men stand talking in a dimly lit nightclub in the Zona Rosa, the pink zone of Mexico City. The stranger is tall and handsome, charismatic and charming, drawing the young man to him. He feels he can trust him. Before long, an invitation has been extended and the two make their way to the stranger's apartment. But the night does not go as the young man had hoped. The next thing he knows, he wakes up, tied to a chair, his hands and feet bound together. The apartment has now become his prison, the charismatic stranger his captor. He pleads for his freedom, but it's no use. Several days later, a black suitcase is discovered abandoned in the streets of Mexico City. Inside, the body of the young man. This is Invisible Hate. Welcome back to Invisible Hate, a weekly true crime podcast in which Asad and I attempt to uncover the ugly truth behind various hate crimes, both recent and historical.
Yeah, that's right, Saadia. Many of the cases that we discuss involve crimes committed against minority groups, and our goal with this podcast is to determine, through a discussion of the nuances and the complexities of these unfortunate situations, whether or not these transgressions can be considered hate crimes. As will soon become clear, today's case appears to fit many of the criteria for a hate crime, but let's not get ahead of ourselves just yet. Saadia, how was your week?
My week's been fine, Asad. As you know, I am still dealing with what happened a couple of weeks ago. My husband was in a motorcycle accident.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so yesterday we went to see his motorcycle, which was finally shipped from Virginia and arrived in New York. And just looking at the motorcycle made everything more real.
Yeah, I can imagine. Was it destroyed?
It was destroyed. It was totaled. And I got really emotional just looking at the bike. And I kept thinking about the alternate scenario and what could have happened. So It was a very difficult moment for me. But the irony is my husband still thinks it's okay to get back on the bike. So,
oh my goodness. So just to recap, your husband was on a road trip with his cousin and got into a motorcycle accident that was pretty serious down in what, North Carolina?
Virginia,
close enough. And then he's been injured and he was in the hospital for a couple days. And now a couple weeks later, they've shipped the bike back.
Yep.
Wow. And now he wants to get back on the bike.
I mean, he physically can't right now, but he eventually wants to.
Oh my goodness.
And that really makes me anxious.
Yeah, tell him to add a third wheel. I feel like that makes everything safer. It doesn't look as cool, but I feel like that's what he should do.
That's not a bad idea. Asad, how was your week?
Yeah, I was good. You know, we went to a wedding in northern New Jersey, and we had, I don't know if this has ever happened to you or anybody out there, so we had an Airbnb, and on the second day, a police officer knocked on the door.
What? Why?
Yeah. They were looking for the owner of the house. You know, we rented a house for my family, and I guess we couldn't really figure it out, but it seemed as if perhaps the owner of the house owed someone money, and they were checking to see whether or not we were short-term or long-term renters. The funniest thing was the sheriff, the person that came, the police officer that came. I was like, yeah, we're renting it from Airbnb. First of all, he didn't know what Airbnb was, which I thought was pretty funny.
That's pretty messed up.
Then the second thing is he asked me to spell Airbnb.
Oh, wow.
Which it's also funny because, you know, Airbnb, you know,
oh my gosh.
You spell it the same way that you say it. But yeah, so that was interesting. An interesting start to our vacation, you know, just kind of putting you at ease. I feel like, maybe there's some sort of crime that we need to investigate that had happened with the owner of our residence.
So basically, he got the information and then left.
Yeah, and then we never heard from him again. I obviously messaged the owner and Airbnb, but yeah, kind of crazy, huh? That's never happened to me before.
I want to know what the owner said, Asad.
The owner just asked if they left any papers. And for those that have used Airbnb, sometimes there are like property managers versus owners. I couldn't tell whether the person that we were communicating with was actually owned the house or was just a, property manager. So he said he would go investigate, and whether he did or not, who knows. But yeah, very interesting. It just kind of left like we didn't know if we were going to get evicted at any point during this stay.
Oh my gosh, that's quite interesting, Asad.
Yeah.
So, talking about crimes, should we get back to the case?
Yeah, so let's get started, Saadia.
So, it's mid-October 2005. A 25-year-old man named Raúl Osiel Marroquín Reyes wanders the streets of Mexico City's Zona Rosa. Zona Rosa, translated as the Pink Zone, is known for its collection of cafes and nightclubs, many of which are frequented by members of the LGBTQ+ community. Marroquín wanders into a nightclub. The music pulses through him as he weaves his way through a crowd of people, and then he waits. Tall, thin, and handsome, he stands at the edge of the crowd, waiting to be noticed. And sure enough, a young man soon approaches him. His name is Jonathan Rezo Ayala, and he is a 20-year-old college student. Marroquín introduces himself as Carlos. The two immediately hit it off. Marroquín's charisma is undeniable. Ayala finds him charming. Before long, Marroquín has invited the young man back to his apartment. Ayala accepts and the two leave the club together. The two men reach the apartment, and then Marroquín asks a very strange question. Asad, you'll be surprised as to what he asks.
Oh, man. Okay.
He basically wants to know if Ayala and his family have substantial financial resources.
Oh, interesting.
That's pretty fucked up. That to me is red flag, right?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, totally.
Anyways, the question obviously confuses the young man. He does respond though by saying that they do in fact have substantial financial resources.
Wow, that's such an interesting conversation.
I know. Why would you disclose
first time meeting
that?
someone? Yeah.
Why?
Yeah, right.
Like, just keep it to yourself. Say they're
For
poor,
sure, totally.
right?
Yeah, yeah.
Maybe he was trying to impress him. Who knows?
Yeah, right. That's true. Yeah, you never know.
He takes a seat while Marroquín goes to get something. Now, this is becoming scarier by the minute, right? The next thing Ayala knows, he wakes up tied to the chair.
Oh, wow.
His hands and feet are bound with white plastic straps, Asad.
Oh, no. Yeah.
He pleads for his freedom, but Marroquín refuses to let him go. A ransom request is sent to the family. Now, he demands 50,000 pesos, which is around $3,000 for their son's freedom.
Wow.
But Marroquín has overestimated their financial resources. The family doesn't have the 50,000 pesos to free him.
Oh, no.
For 16 days, the captive sits tied up in Marroquín's apartment. It is believed that within that time, he's tortured and mistreated. And then the young man is killed. Marroquín hangs his victim, depriving him of oxygen until he dies. On October 27th, 2005, Rezo's body is found in a black suitcase abandoned near the Chapucano metro station.
Wow, Saadia, this is a wild story. So basically this guy goes into a club, meets another person, and then they go back to the apartment, and before he knows it, he's tied up and a ransom is sent to his family, and they realize that they can't afford their son's freedom. And so then 2 weeks later, tied up, tortured, mistreated, and then hanged. Wow. Wild story. I mean, just really awful.
It is wild, Asad, and I have so many thoughts and questions. Why would somebody go to a stranger's apartment? But then when I think about it, I feel like I am victim shaming and I want to stop myself right
Yeah.
there and then. But what are your thoughts?
I think for people that haven't done it, it's scary. I think that it does put you into a potentially compromised situation, right? And but yeah, I think to your point, he didn't do anything wrong. It seems like he was interested in this person and wanted to get to know them better. He was just a victim here.
Exactly. And unfortunately, the story isn't over because Marroquín doesn't stop there. He kills a total of 4 victims.
Oh, wow.
Every time, the formula remains the same. He wanders into nightclubs, cafes, and restaurants frequented by gay men. He lets his victim make the initial approach so as to avoid suspicion. Oh my gosh, Asad, this is so fucking clever of him, right? Wow. After charming them with his charismatic, manipulative personality, he invites them to either a hotel or his apartment. There he seeks information regarding their financial situation. Wow. And if they are unlucky enough to possess a substantial amount of money, he basically ties them up and holds them captive. Then he demands a ransom payment. And in most cases, regardless of whether or not their families pay for their release, he refuses to let them go.
Oh my goodness.
He tortures them for several days, hanging them with rope and eventually killing them through ligature strangulation.
Wow.
Asa, do you know what ligature strangulation is?
Strangling them with a rope.
By the way, this earns him the nickname El Sádico, the sadist. Further earning his title, one victim is found missing skin from his forehead.
Oh my goodness.
The skin had been taken off with a razor in the shape of a star figure. Some believe that it is an inverted pentagram, a satanic symbol, Asad. And after killing his victim, Marroquín then places their body in a black suitcase and leaves it on the streets of Mexico City. There it remains until someone stumbles on it, discovering its horrific contents. Asad, this is beyond the pale. We have covered many cases.
Right.
But this is just so unfathomable. And it happens with serial killers, right? When somebody commits more than one crime.
It's like a checklist on what he's doing to these victims. It's crazy that it's just so almost routine, right? And how did he get to this point where, this is what he thinks he needs to do or has to do? It's absolutely appalling, and clearly he deserves that title of the sadist. Like, just crazy. You mentioned that there were 3 victims. Who were they?
Yes, Asad. So sadly, 3 other individuals lose their lives to Marroquín. On December 9, 2005, the lifeless body of 32-year-old Ricardo Hernandez is found abandoned in a suitcase near the Chapucano metro station. Hernandez had been a television station employee. Now, his disappearance on November 30th had kickstarted an investigation carried out by the Specialized Sub-Prosecutor for Organized Crime Investigation, I think it's called CEDO, and the Federal Investigation Agency, AFI. According to a news source, Hernandez's family is only able to pay 28,000 of the 120,000 pesos, which roughly translates into $7,000 demanded of them. He is also held captive, but this time for about 9 days before being killed on December 9th. Now, Armando Perez and Victor Beltires are El Sádico's final 2 victims. Both men are employees in their early 20s, both kidnapped mid-December of 2005. Asad, are you seeing a pattern? It's like he is committing crimes frequently, closer to dates. He's not taking any breaks.
Yeah, it's like one right after the other. That's exactly what I noticed is the timeline, because the first one was, you said, mid-October, and then this one was in November, and now we're in mid-December. It's like back to back to back. So brazen.
Exactly. And Perez is taken first, followed by Balderas just a few days later. According to another news source, Balderas' family pays the 8,300 pesos, which is roughly $480 ransom. It is believed that Perez's family too pays a ransom, but it's no use, Asad. Marroquín kills them both anyways.
That's so horrible. I mean, all of this is horrible, but the fact that then he takes the money and then kills them anyway.
It seems like it doesn't matter to him if somebody pays ransom or not.
Yeah, right. It's all about power, control, and...
You're absolutely right, Asad. This is about power, control. This is a very sociopathic behavior.
Yeah. Agreed.
Both men are found on December 23rd on the streets of Mexico City.
Wow.
Unfortunately, Asad, there are two other victims that we have yet to mention.
Oh, whoa, okay.
While Marroquín kills 4 men, there are 2 additional individuals whom he kidnaps and thankfully later releases. Which to me is a bit weird, right? Why this distinction? Why this difference, dichotomy? I don't know what he's thinking, right?
It's hard to get into a mind of a serial killer, but it seems like from the stuff that I've read or watched on TV, it's like for every additional thing that they do, they try to push the boundaries a little bit more and a little bit more and a little bit more. And so, yeah, who knows what he was thinking in this scenario.
Right. And according to press release by the PGR, the first of these kidnapping victims was a 28-year-old employee who Marroquín met in a restaurant on the perimeter of the Zona Rosa. Marroquín brought him to one of the hotels where he was later found with both his hands and feet bound together. It is believed that the man's family paid ransom, though the amount was not disclosed. The 28-year-old was lucky, as it is suspected that his kidnapping occurred when Marroquín limited his criminal activity to kidnapping before he had begun to resort to murder. So you're absolutely right, Asad. He starts with kidnapping and then somehow it progresses to something a lot more evil and sinister. And we don't know why that shift happens, right?
Totally. And it happened so quickly too. Like, it's heartbreaking.
According to the same press release, Marroquín also kidnapped a restaurant employee. He later released the man after learning that his family did not have the financial resources to pay ransom. I said, this guy is really confused.
Yeah.
Like, he's fucking confused. Like, I don't know what he wants.
Yeah. I mean, he probably doesn't even know himself. Like, he's probably just going on whatever instinct, adrenaline, who knows it. Yeah. And clearly he's not in his right mind.
You're absolutely right. And the interesting thing, he did threaten to kill the man if he reported the kidnapping. So he basically releases him, but then he threatens him not to report the crime. This brings Marroquín's known victim count to 6 individuals, 4 homicides, and 2 kidnappings.
Well, I can't imagine, obviously it's so traumatic for all these people, like to be kidnapped, to be then bound, and then potentially killed. I mean, for weeks being held. It's hard to fathom and think through what these people were going through. And these are only 6 victims that we know about. I'm sure there's probably more out there, right, that we don't know about. Saadia, let's take a quick break, and when we return, I want to know more about Marroquín himself. Welcome back to Invisible Hate. So, Saadia, tell me more about this guy, Sádico, the sadist, Marroquín.
Yeah, so as you said, Marroquín Sádico, the sadist, was born on September 1st, 1980 in Mexico. He grew up in Tampico with his parents. In an interview with a podcast, he claimed that he had a very normal, happy childhood. According to a news source, on January 21st, 1999, he entered the 15th Infantry Battalion of Tampico as a soldier. He remained in the Mexican army for about 4 years, reaching the rank of first sergeant. However, while in the army, he committed several crimes.
Oh, that's interesting.
This included robbery with violence, for which he allegedly spent 14 months in prison. In May 2004, he was discharged and returned to civilian life. According to another news source, the army is where Marroquín basically learned tactics to hunt people, aiding him in his actions, his work as a kidnapper.
Yeah, that's crazy. Yeah, I mean, if you're going to learn anywhere, you're going to learn it in the army or military, right?
Exactly. Now, some sources do suggest that he probably is a psychopath. This essentially means that he lacks the ability to empathize with others in the way that most people like you and I, Asad, are able to. And he is not capable of typical emotional responses. As a result, he does not feel guilty for inflicting pain and harm on others. However, as far as public information goes, there has been no official psychological assessment of Marroquín, so this is merely speculation based on his behavior. Asad, whatever information we have so far, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, it's clear that he has a bunch of issues, and I'm shocked that there wasn't an official psychological assessment of him that was done. You know, and Saadia, to commit such horrific crimes and to not feel guilty about it, I mean, it's like essentially we rely on guilt, you know, as a means of keeping our moral compasses in line. And so you'd think that there are people walking around out there who are capable of committing such atrocious acts without feeling guilty. It's kind of really terrifying. And, you know, there's probably more people out there than we know. So was he ever caught by police, Saadia?
Asad, he was. It took some time to identify and catch him, but they eventually did. The investigation began on November 30th, 2005, with the disappearance of television station employee Ricardo Hernandez. The investigation was conducted by the Specialized Sub-Prosecutor for Organized Crime Investigation and the Federal Investigation Agency. Neither of these organizations have released many details regarding the investigation, but through this process, the police were able to determine that Marroquín was responsible for the series of kidnappings and homicides. So, on January 23rd, 2006, El Sádico was finally tracked down and arrested in Mexico City. Basically, Marroquín was eventually arrested, and quickly too. According to a press release by the PGR, during his arrest, the following objects were seized: 3 bank cards that he had used to carry out ransom payments, a cell phone, several knives, and 2 identification credentials of his victims.
That's crazy. Why is he carrying those around?
I don't know, Asad. Probably as trophies, serving as reminders of his criminal quote-unquote victories.
That's interesting. Yeah, it makes sense.
Now, the AFI immediately brought him in for questioning. In the interview, Marroquín confessed to having killed his victims through strangulation. He detailed the way in which he had lured and murdered his victims.
Posteriormente decidimos ejecutarlo y lo asfixiamos, lo ahorcamos con una cuerda.
He also claimed to have targeted homosexual men not because he was homophobic, but because they were easier targets to kidnap and murder.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. He even claimed to have done society a favor by murdering these men.
Yeah, that's what a ridiculous thing to say.
He said, and I quote Asad, "I snuffed out 4 homosexuals that in some way were affecting society," unquote. He argued that gay people are, quote, "a bad example for kids," unquote.
clearly, yeah, he's a homophobe and was targeting these people. Yeah, that I'm sure we'll discuss more later, but yeah, just ridiculous.
Marroquín then further attempted to justify his actions by telling AFI investigators that one of his victims was an HIV carrier. He claims to have done a good thing by preventing the HIV from spreading to others. He said, and I quote, "In a certain way, I prevented the spread of the virus." Unquote.
This is just so awful. I mean, how many times have we heard from these murderers that they're like trying to save society by murdering someone or torturing or killing or whatever it may be? Like, it's just such a convoluted thought process and just so awful. And earlier he was like, "Oh, I'm not homophobic. I'm not homophobic. I didn't target these people because they were homosexual." And then he goes on to say that, yeah, I'm trying to prevent the spread of HIV. Just like, so fucking ridiculous.
Absolutely, Asad. And get this, Marroquín wasn't in any way remorseful for his actions.
Yeah, clearly.
In fact, according to a news source, he said, and I quote, "I would do it again. Just be more careful not to get caught and not make the same mistakes. My only regret is what my family is going through now." Unquote. What the fuck, Asad? Like, he has no remorse. He has killed innocent people. He doesn't feel guilty. The only thing he's thinking about is his family.
It's shocking and not surprising. And yeah, I mean, clearly this guy has no emotions and yeah, ridiculous.
And Asad, I'm about to share something with you which will make you even more angry. Now, Marroquín viewed these victims as a kind of training for, guess what? Bigger targets.
Oh.
He hoped to improve his criminal career by gradually targeting richer, more famous victims.
Wow.
Investigators also discovered that Marroquín hadn't been alone in his conquests. Now, this is a twist. He had an accomplice, but it is unclear what happened to him. Several sources claim he was never captured, while others claim he was detained.
Oh, that's crazy. So there was someone else that was helping him. We don't know how he was helping them, and this person is still on the loose, potentially?
We have no idea, so this is really scary.
If there is someone else out there that could have been helping him, that person is potentially on the loose, and it's very scary.
Absolutely, Asad. We are going to take another quick break, but when we return, we'll be discussing Marroquín's trial.
Welcome back to Invisible Hate. So, Saadia, we are now up to the point where he's captured and he's about to go to trial. What was the trial like?
Unfortunately, there is little information about the trial. However, we know that in September of 2008, he was sentenced to 128 plus years in prison for the kidnapping of 6 men and the murder of 4 of them.
Makes sense. Yeah, that's great.
This sentence was later increased.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So Marroquín will now serve around 290 years in prison. In other words, a life sentence.
Yeah, he's not going anywhere for that.
He is not. He is now serving his sentence in a federal district penitentiary in the Santa Marta neighborhood where he was transferred in 2010.
That's great. I mean, he definitely deserves to be in prison for a long time, and I hope that he gets the help and rehabilitation that he needs to not be so consumed by all this hate and anger and murderous tendencies. So, Saadia, this is one of our first cases outside the U.S. So what are the hate crimes like in Mexico?
So that's a great question. Now, in Mexico, hate crime laws appear to vary by region. These laws are far less nationalized than those of the United States. According to the Stonewall organization in Mexico City, the city in which Marroquín committed his crimes, hate crimes committed based on sexual orientation and or gender identity are considered an aggravating circumstances. under the 2002 Criminal Code of Mexico City. So it's unclear whether or not Marroquin's crimes were officially labeled as hate crimes, but this brings us to our primary question. Do we think these atrocious transgressions should be considered hate crimes?
I think at a high level, if we're looking at it from an American lens of what is considered a hate crime and whatnot, I think that, yeah, to me, the fact that he targeted gay people and there were 6 of them and he clearly showed no remorse and said all sorts of stuff. I think to me, it's a no-brainer that this was a hate crime. I mean, let's go through it. So he explicitly stated that he intentionally targeted homosexuals. Remember, he said that he snuffed out 4 homosexuals that in some way were affecting society. So that's very kind of suggestive of being a hate crime. As if you can recall, Saadia, he said that homosexuals were like easier targets, right? And so that's why he was targeting that community, because they were easier to kidnap and to ransom and I guess to murder as well. So for me, like, those 2 are the biggest things. How about for you?
Asad, I want to add something. Now, it seems there is some kind of dichotomy when he says, oh, I wasn't targeting them because they were part of the LGBTQ plus community, but I was targeting them because they were easier targets. To me, that also can classify as hate crime because he is making a judgment based on their perceived identity and how they may behave because of that, right?
Right.
So
Yeah,
calling
totally.
them easier target is also based off of their sexual orientation, which can also mean it was a hate crime, right?
Yeah,
And
totally.
in addition to that, as you said, we've quoted him saying nasty things about, homosexuals, about the LGBTQ plus community. He even claimed that his actions benefited society because according to him, gay people are bad example for kids. So all of that makes me believe that this was indeed a hate crime.
Yeah.
And to top it off, he did not feel any remorse, which may be because he is probably a sociopath and was committing a hate crime. All of that combined makes me think that this is probably one of the worst cases we've covered so far.
Back to what we were talking about earlier, how quickly it escalated, right? I think that it was just like back to back to back. It's just so crazy to me. I think we're in agreement that this should have been or could be considered a hate crime, right, Saadia?
Yeah, exactly, Asad.
So where is Marroquín today?
So he remains in the Santa Marta Federal District Penitentiary, where he continues to serve out his life sentence. And Asad, honestly, we can only hope that his 2 surviving kidnapping victims and the families of his homicide victims are able to heal from the trauma and grief that they have endured, which may be very, very difficult, Asad. I cannot even imagine what these people must be going through. And Asad, we have covered so many cases that focus on the LGBTQ plus community. And what we've realized is that although, serial killers such as Marroquín are thankfully relatively uncommon, targeted acts of hate and prejudice against members of the LGBTQ plus community are unfortunately far more frequent, Asad, and we see that across the globe, right?
Yeah, for sure.
It's happening everywhere. We see it happening in the US, Mexico, India, Pakistan. It is just so sad. But I will also caveat this with something else, Asad. Now, in Mexico, due to the strong traditional Catholic influences still present in much of the country, members of the LGBTQ community continue to face prejudice and intolerance, right?
Yeah.
We truly hope that in discussing this issue, we not only shed light on these victims and their stories, but we also encourage a greater discussion about prejudice, discrimination, hatred, and acceptance. I would really, really like our listeners, whoever is listening to us right now in this moment, to write to us, to share their thoughts. How these conversations that we are having on Invisible Hate have influenced them, impacted them, changed their points of view.
100% agree with everything you just say. How can those listeners help, actually, Saadia?
So listeners, here's what you can do. You can help support the protection and advancement of LGBTQ plus rights in Mexico by donating to the nonprofit organizations Yaj Mexico and Outright International. You know what, Asad? This is so interesting. I didn't even realize this is our first international case.
Yeah.
And we may be doing more international cases. So again, listeners, if there is a case outside the US that you want us to cover, write to us. You can even DM us. By the way, I check our DMs every single day.
Nice.
Anyways, thanks so much for listening to Invisible Hate. If you want to learn more, check out links in the show notes about the case. Please email us your thoughts on this story or any other story you think we should cover. We've said this a million times. We'll say it again. Reach out to us at info@invisiblehatepodcast.com. You can also tweet us or hit us up on Instagram. Just search for Invisible Hate Podcast.
Yeah, and thanks again for listening. If you like what you hear, please share with a friend. Invisible Hate is a joint production of Rafaelion Media and Immigrantly. We'd like to thank our team, which includes Michaela Strather, Emmanuel Monahan, and Paroma Chakravarti. Our music was done by Simon Hutchinson, and we'll be back next week for another hate crime for us to analyze. Until then, I'm Asad Butt.
And I'm Saadia Khan.